That night, my mother whispered to my father amidst the clinking of crystal glasses. I saw him text my brother, and 10 minutes later, while the family toasted to unity, he drove to my apartment with a fresh set of locks. They thought I was trapped here, oblivious. They had no idea I had changed the only lock that truly mattered 3 months ago, not on my front door, but on their entire story. My name is Aubrey Washington. I am 34 years old, and if you asked anyone in this room to describe me in a single word, they would not say daughter or friend, or even woman. They would say responsible. It is a heavy beige word, the kind of adjective you apply to a reliable sedan or a sturdy pair of winter boots. I have worn that word like a tailored suit for my entire adult life. I am the operations manager at Axis Meridian Logistics, a company where I move millions of dollars of freight across global borders with the precision of a surgeon. But my real job, the one I have never been paid for, is managing the chaotic, glittering, fraudulent supply chain that is the Washington family. Tonight, that supply chain was on full display at the Crescent Lake Country Hall. The room smelled of white lilies and ambition. We were here to celebrate the 30th wedding anniversary of Charles and Linda Washington, an event that had been stage-managed with more scrutiny than a presidential debate. The theme was Enduring Legacy, which was ironic considering the foundation of this marriage was built on silence and separate bank accounts. The hall was bathed in a soft, golden light that was specifically calibrated to smooth out wrinkles and make diamonds sparkle just a little bit brighter. Round tables were draped in heavy linens the color of crushed pearls, and the centerpieces were towering architectural feats of orchids and hydrangeas that cost more than most people's cars. I stood near the periphery of the ballroom, holding a club soda I had been nursing for 45 minutes. I was not mingling. I never mingle. In the ecosystem of my family, I am not a guest. I am part of the infrastructure. I am the one who checks that the band knows the do not play list. I am the one who ensures my father's scotch is always within reach but never too full. I am the one who makes sure the illusion holds. From my vantage point, I watched my mother, Linda Washington. She looked immaculate in a floor-length gown of oyster-colored silk, her hair a perfect helmet of blonde highlights. She was laughing at a joke made by the mayor, her head thrown back just enough to show off the sapphire necklace at her throat, but not enough to look undignified. She was playing the role of the benevolent matriarch, the philanthropic queen of the Washington Impact Initiative. Beside her stood my father, Charles. He was gripping the shoulder of a potential donor, his smile wide, his eyes completely dead. They looked invincible. They looked like a couple who had conquered the world together, rather than two people who had just spent the car ride over arguing about the liquidity of their offshore assets. I took a small sip of my soda. The bubbles burned my throat. I felt a familiar sensation, a coldness that started in my chest and radiated outward. It was the feeling of being surrounded but completely alone. I was the fixer, the one they called when the credit cards were declined or when the PR statements needed to be proofread for legal loopholes. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different. The air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the humidity. It happened at 8:15. I saw Linda stop laughing. Her face went slack for a fraction of a second. A glitch in the programming. She leaned in toward my father. It was a movement so intimate, so practiced, that anyone else would have mistaken it for affection. But I knew better. I knew the angle of her neck and the set of her jaw. This was business. Time seemed to slow down, stretching like taffy. The jazz band was playing a cover of a Sinatra song, but the sound faded into a dull hum in my ears. I watched my mother's lips move against my father's ear. I could not hear the words, but I saw the result. She pulled back and looked at me. It was a glance that lasted less than a second. Her eyes met mine across the room, cutting through the candlelight and the expensive flowers. There was no warmth in that look. There was no recognition of me as her child. It was the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, calculating the yield, deciding where to make the first cut. She looked at me, and then she turned away, dismissing me entirely. I felt a chill slide down my spine, sharper than ice. I knew that look. That was the look of a decision being made, A liquidation. My father nodded once. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and withdrew his phone. He did not look at me. He looked down at the screen, his thumbs moving with practiced efficiency. I was standing near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the dark expanse of the golf course. The glass was reflective against the night sky, turning the window into a black mirror. From where I stood, I could see the reflection of my father's phone screen. It was small, inverted, and blurry, but I have spent 15 years reading manifests and invoices. My eyes are trained for detail. I saw 3 words flash in the reflection of the bright white text box. Locks. Apartment. Tonight, I did not blink. I did not gasp. I did not drop my glass. I am Aubrey Washington, and I do not make scenes. I handle them. Across the ballroom, near the open bar, another screen lit up. My brother, Austin Washington, the golden boy, the heir apparent. He was 31 years old, handsome in a way that suggested he had never been told no in his entire life. He was laughing with his current girlfriend, a model whose name I could never remember, his hand resting casually on her waist. He felt the vibration in his pocket. He pulled out his phone, and I watched his face transform. The easy social charm evaporated, replaced by a smirk that I knew all too well. It was the smile he wore when he got away with something. It was the smile he wore when I took the blame for his fender benders in high school. It was the smile of a predator who had just been given permission to hunt. He glanced at the message, then looked up, his eyes scanning the room until they found me. He didn't look away. He stared right at me, offering a small, mocking nod, before turning to his girlfriend. I saw him mouth the words, "Urgent call and business emergency." He didn't wait for her response. He simply turned on his heel and walked out of the ballroom, moving with the purposeful stride of a man on a mission. He wasn't going to make a call. He was going to my apartment. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the cold glass of club soda. My mother had just ordered my father to order my brother to lock me out of my own home, and they had done it while I was standing 20 feet away, assuming I was too stupid or too distracted to notice. They thought I was trapped here. They thought the social obligation of this party was a cage that would hold me while they dismantled my life. They thought I was the dutiful Aubrey, the reliable Aubrey, the Aubrey who would wait until the cake was cut before checking her phone. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lilies and betrayal. I pulled my own phone from my clutch. My hands were steady. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were steady. I opened the logistics app for the catering team. I moved a task from pending to complete. I adjusted the timing for the champagne toast. I looked for all the world like I was working, like I was being responsible. But my mind was racing. Locks, apartment, tonight. They were going to change the cylinders on the front door. They wanted to seize my files, my laptop, the physical evidence of the life I had built outside their shadow. They wanted to lock me out so they could control the narrative, so they could negotiate my surrender from a position of power. They wanted me homeless and desperate and begging for a key. A notification banner slid down from the top of my screen. It was not a text message. It was an alert from a security application that did not exist on the factory version of this phone. It was an app I had coded myself, linked to a mesh network I had installed in my apartment 3 months ago. Alert. Perimeter breach attempted. Front door. That was expected. Austin was fast. He must have been driving like a maniac. Or perhaps he had the locksmith waiting around the corner. But then, a second notification appeared. This was the one that made the corner of my mouth twitch upward, just a fraction of an inch. Alert. Silent access request. Sector 4, library wall. Austin wasn't just changing the front door lock. He was inside, and he was trying to access the spaces he thought he knew. But what my family did not understand was that the apartment they visited, the one with the beige sofas and the tasteful art, was just a showroom. It was a front. 3 months ago, when I first noticed the irregularities in the charity accounts, I had hired a contractor from 3 towns over. I paid him in cash. We built a false wall behind the built-in bookshelves in my study. We installed a heavy-duty, commercial-grade steel door with a biometric smart lock, hidden completely from view. The notification on my phone wasn't telling me that my front door was open. I knew that. It was telling me that my brother was standing in my study, likely pulling books off the shelves, looking for a safe that wasn't there, unaware that he was standing inches away from the real nerve center of my operation. And more importantly, the system told me that the hidden camera in the bookshelf was now live. I tapped the screen, dismissing the alert. I did not open the video feed. Not yet. I did not need to see him to know what he looked like. I knew exactly what he looked like when he was violating my privacy. I looked up. The band had stopped playing. A hush fell over the room. My mother was standing at the microphone on the small stage. The spotlight hit her, turning her hair into a halo of white gold. She looked angelic. She looked like the mother everyone wanted. 30 years, she began, her voice trembling with a perfectly manufactured emotion. 30 years of building a life, building a legacy. She reached out and took my father's hand. He squeezed it, looking at her with adoring eyes. We have faced storms, Linda continued, her voice gaining strength. We have faced challenges, but we have survived because of one simple thing, one unshakable truth. She paused for effect. The room held its breath. Trust, she said, and the unbreakable bond of family. We protect each other. We hold each other up. That is the Washington way. The applause was thunderous. People were wiping tears from their eyes. My father kissed her hand. It was a beautiful performance. I stood there, clapping slowly, my hands meeting with a soft, rhythmic thud. I watched my mother bask in the adoration of the crowd. I watched her smile, secure in the knowledge that her problem was being handled, that her daughter was being erased, that the locks were being changed. She thought she was giving a speech about love. I knew she was giving a eulogy for our relationship. I took one last sip of my club soda and set the glass down on a passing waiter's tray. Let them have their applause. Let them have their locks. Let Austin turn every bolt in that apartment until his hands blistered. He was locking me out of a building, but I had already locked them out of the truth. And unlike the keys my brother was currently fumbling with, the key to my survival was something they could never steal, because they never believed I was smart enough to forge it. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, checked the time on my phone, 8:42, and prepared to endure the rest of the night. I would smile, I would nod, I would be responsible. And tomorrow, the war would begin. I was 16 years old the first time I realized my parents did not view me as a child, but as a sophisticated insurance policy. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the house phone rang. It was not the line for social calls. It was the dedicated landline my father kept for urgent matters. I picked it up before the second ring because I knew my parents had taken sleeping pills after a heavy dinner, and Austin was supposed to be at a study group. Austin was not studying. He was at a police station on the edge of town, having backed his brand-new convertible into a retaining wall while trying to impress a girl who was far too young for him. He was 17, drunk, and crying. I did not wake my parents. I drove to the station, paid the tow truck driver in cash from the emergency envelope my father kept in the freezer, and charmed the desk sergeant with a story about a deer running into the road and a panic attack. By the time the sun came up, Austin was in his bed. The car was at a private body shop that owed my father a favor, and my parents woke up none the wiser. When I finally told my mother about it 3 years later, she did not hug me. She did not thank me for protecting her son. She simply nodded, took a sip of her Chardonnay, and said, "It is good to know you have a cool head. Aubrey, we need someone sensible in this house." That was the moment the cement dried around my feet. The Washington family operated less like a domestic unit and more like a mid-sized corporation with a toxic HR department. Love was not an emotion. It was a transactional currency. If you performed well, if you looked pretty in the Christmas card photo, if you got into the right sorority, if you married the right pedigree, you were paid in dividends. These dividends came in the form of Cartier watches, trips to the Amalfi Coast, and public praise. If you failed, or worse, if you embarrassed them, you were fined. The fine was silence. It was my father looking through you at the breakfast table for 3 weeks. It was my mother forgetting to order a place setting for you at Thanksgiving. It was a cold, suffocating exclusion that made you desperate to earn your way back onto the payroll. Austin was the golden asset. He was volatile, yes, but he had charisma. He was the product they were selling to the world. I, on the other hand, was the back-end support. I was the compliance officer. This dynamic became formalized when my parents launched the Washington Impact Initiative. On paper, it was a philanthropic foundation dedicated to empowering community growth and fostering local leadership. In reality, it was a tax shelter that doubled as a public relations machine. They threw galas that cost 6 figures to raise $50,000 for a park bench. They handed out scholarships that came with mandatory photo opportunities. I was 26 when my father asked me to take a look at the numbers. "You are so meticulous, Aubrey," he had said, patting my shoulder with a hand that felt heavy and possessive. "You have that mind for details. Austin is a big-picture thinker, you know? He has the vision. But you are reliable. We need someone to make sure the data quality is up to par for the auditors." So, I became the unofficial auditor of our family's morality. I spent my weekends drowning in spreadsheets while Austin was in Europe networking for his future political career. They were grooming him for the Riverton City Council, a stepping stone, they hoped, to the state senate. His face was plastered on billboards and brochures, smiling that winning smile that suggested he had never known a day of hardship. Meanwhile, I was in the basement office, reconciling expenses labeled consulting fees and logistical support. My mother taught me that family first was the supreme commandment, but like all religious texts, she interpreted it to suit her needs. Family first meant that when I was offered a promotion to Director of Operations at Axis Meridian Logistics 3 years earlier than expected, I had to turn down the transfer to London because your father is going through a stressful merger and needs you close by. Family first meant that when I met a man named David, a kind, soft-spoken architect who looked at me like I was the only person in the room, I had to end it after 6 months. My mother told me he was too pedestrian and that his lack of ambition would drag down the Washington brand. When I tried to argue, she simply stopped speaking to me for 40 days. I broke up with David on a rainy Tuesday, and the silence at the dinner table ended the very next morning. I traded love for a past plate of asparagus. I remember a specific dinner last November. The dining room was dimly lit, the table set with the heavy silver service. Austin was holding court, talking about his vision for a revitalized downtown Riverton. "We need to disrupt the zoning laws," Austin said, waving a fork loaded with filet mignon. "I was telling the developers yesterday, we need to think about vertical integration. It is going to be huge, a complete paradigm shift." My parents nodded, entranced. My father looked at him with a hunger that was almost frightening. He was seeing his own immortality in Austin's tailored suit. "That is brilliant, son," Charles said. "Truly visionary." "I actually implemented a new security protocol at Axis Meridian this week," I said, trying to insert myself into the warmth of the conversation. "We reduced cargo theft by 18% in a single quarter. It is a new system of encrypted digital keys that changes every 12 hours. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother cleared her throat and adjusted her napkin. "That is nice, dear," she said, her voice flat. "But let's not bore everyone with logistics. Austin, tell us more about the ribbon-cutting ceremony." They dismissed me. To them, my work was small. It was administrative. It was boring. They saw me as a glorified secretary who happened to share their DNA. But here's the thing about being the person who cleans up the mess. You see exactly what the mess is made of. Because they thought my work was boring. They never bothered to check what I was actually doing, because they thought I was just fixing the books. They gave me every password. They gave me the admin keys to the cloud servers. They signed the power of attorney documents without reading them because Aubrey handles the fine print. They thought they were assigning me chores. In reality, they were handing me the blueprints to their destruction. I looked around the ballroom now, watching my cousin's children chasing each other near the dessert table. A little girl, barely 5 years old, tripped on the hem of her dress and spilled a cup of fruit punch onto the pristine white carpet. She froze, her eyes wide with terror, waiting for the inevitable shriek of an adult. I moved before I even thought about it. I knelt beside her, using my own silk handkerchief to dab at the stain. "It is okay," I whispered, shielding her from the view of the room. "It is just juice. It is not a tragedy." She looked at me, her lower lip trembling. "Auntie Linda will be mad." "Auntie Linda won't know," I promised, giving her a conspiratorial wink. "Go get a cookie. I will handle this." She hugged me then, her small arms wrapping around my neck with a genuine, sticky warmth that I had not felt from another human being in years. I hugged her back, holding on for a second longer than necessary. I loved these kids. I loved them because they were not yet broken. They were not yet leverage. I made sure to teach them that mistakes were allowed, that value wasn't determined by a report card or a dress size. I wanted to be the shield for them that I never had for myself. Standing up, I watched the little girl run off, safe and happy. Then I looked back at my parents on the stage. They thought responsibility was a trait I was born with, like my eye color. They praised me for it, leaned on it, exploited it. They bound me with it. But as I stood there, feeling the phantom weight of the new keys in my pocket, the ones for the hidden room they didn't know existed, I realized the truth. Responsibility had been the handcuff they used to chain me to their radiator. They kept me close so I could regulate the temperature of their lives, so I could bleed off the pressure before the pipes burst. But handcuffs have a funny way of working. If you wear them long enough, you learn exactly how the locking mechanism functions. And if you are the one holding the keys to the entire building, eventually, you realize that you are not the one who is trapped. You are the warden. My mother finished her speech, raising a glass of champagne high in the air. "To family," she toasted, "our greatest treasure." "To family," the room echoed. I raised my empty hand, my fingers curling into a fist at my side. I was done being responsible for their happiness. I was done being the fixer. They had spent 30 years teaching me that every transaction has a cost. They just didn't realize that tonight. The bill was finally coming due, and for the first time in history, they were the ones who couldn't afford to pay it. It started on a rainy Thursday afternoon, 3 months before the anniversary party, in the sterile, glass-walled offices of the Washington Impact Initiative. The foundation was preparing for a compliance review triggered by a potential partnership with a federal grant program. This meant, for the first time in 5 years, an independent auditor was going to crack open our books. Naturally, my father had a golf tournament, and my mother had a spa appointment, so the task of sanitizing the records for public consumption fell to me. I sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by stacks of binders and the blue glow of 2 monitors. The office was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the HVAC system and the clicking of my mouse. I was not looking for a crime. I was looking for formatting errors. I was looking for missing receipts for catering or mislabeled taxi fares. I was doing what I always did, sweeping the floor so the Washingtons could walk without getting their shoes dirty. Then I saw the vendor code. It was buried in the external consultancy's ledger, a catch-all category usually reserved for grant writers or legal retainers. The vendor name was innocuous enough, AW Strategic Systems. I paused, my finger hovering over the mouse. The initials caught my eye first. AW, Aubrey Washington. It was a narcissist's coincidence, I thought, but then I looked at the payout schedule. On February 4th, a wire transfer for $74,000. On March 15th, another transfer for $93,000. On April 2nd, $81,500. My stomach gave a strange, hollow lurch. I knew the budget of the Washington Impact Initiative down to the penny. We did not hire strategic consultants for that kind of money. We hired interns and PR firms. I opened the vendor profile, expecting to see a legitimate LLC, perhaps a data processing firm with an unfortunate name. Instead, I found a mirror. The registered agent for AW Strategic Systems was listed as Aubrey Jean Washington. The business address was a P.O. box in a neighboring county that I had never rented. The tax identification number was linked to my Social Security number. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my hands cold and clammy. I clicked on the supporting documents for the February transfer. A PDF opened on the screen. It was a consulting agreement for logistical optimization and community outreach, a meaningless word salad designed to say nothing while sounding expensive. And there, at the bottom of the page, was my signature. It was not a forgery in the traditional sense. It was not a shaky approximation scrawled by someone trying to copy my handwriting. It was my digital signature. It was the exact cryptographic key I used at Axis Meridian Logistics, the one I used to sign off on international freight contracts worth millions. It was precise, authenticated, and legally binding. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking loudly in the empty room. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Had I signed this? Had I, in a fog of exhaustion after working an 80-hour week, approved a vendor setup without reading it? I scrolled through my emails, searching for the contract. Nothing. I checked my calendar for meetings with this entity. Nothing. I began to dig. I stopped looking at the formatting and started acting like the forensic accountant I should have been all along. I followed the money trail of the $81,500 sent in April. The funds left the Foundation's Community Development account, authorized by my digital signature. They landed in a checking account at a mid-sized regional bank under the name AW Strategic Systems. From there, the trail should have gone cold for anyone without a warrant. But I knew my family's banking passwords. I knew them because I was the one who set them up. I logged into the regional bank's portal, guessing the security questions based on my father's first dog and my mother's favorite city. The account opened. The money did not stay in AW Strategic Systems. It was a pass-through entity, a financial sieve. Within 48 hours of arriving, the $81,500 had been siphoned out in a series of smaller, less suspicious transactions. $5,000 to a luxury travel concierge service. The same week Austin went to scout locations in Cabo San Lucas. $12,000 to a high-end image consultant group. The same month Austin debuted his new Iron of the People wardrobe for the campaign. $20,000 to a murky political action committee that had recently endorsed Austin's run for city council. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to close my eyes. They were not just stealing money from the foundation. That would have been banal. Rich people stealing from charities is a cliché. No, they were doing something far more specific and far more cruel. They were funding Austin's political ambitions and lifestyle, using money that was legally tied to me. I kept clicking. I went back 2 years. The pattern was consistent. Every time Austin needed a boost, a new car lease, a donation to a key influencer, a settlement for a misunderstanding at a nightclub, a corresponding invoice appeared from AW Strategic Systems, signed by me, paid for by the charity. I looked at the total. Over the last 18 months, nearly $400,000 had been funneled through this shell company. If an auditor saw this, they would not see a family conspiracy. They would see a greedy daughter, the operations expert, creating a fake vendor to embezzle funds from her parents' noble charity. They would see my digital signature on every authorization. They would see the company registered in my name. They would see that the parents, Charles and Linda, were merely the board members who had been duped by their trusted child. I pushed away from the desk and walked to the window. Looking out at the city skyline, the rain was hammering against the glass. I felt like I was drowning. The betrayal was so precise. It was almost elegant. They knew I was the responsible one. They knew I handled the details. So they used that reputation to build a cage around me. But the horror did not stop there. A thought struck me. sharp and sudden. If they had used my identity to create a company, what else had they done? I returned to the computer and pulled up my personal credit report. I had always prided myself on an impeccable score, a testament to my obsession with financial hygiene. The report loaded, and the numbers swam before my eyes. There was a line of credit I did not recognize, a business loan for $50,000, taken out 6 months ago, currently 30 days past due. There were credit cards opened in my name that were maxed out, the statements likely going to that same P.O. box. They were not just setting me up to take the fall for embezzlement, they were leveraging my future to pay for their present. They were eating me alive, bite by financial bite. I realized then why my mother had been so insistent that I not take the job in London. It wasn't because she missed me. It was because you cannot frame a person for local wire fraud if they are living in another country. They needed me here. They needed me close. They needed my digital fingerprint on the server. The panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I channeled the part of me that managed global supply chains. This was a crisis. Crises are managed with data and containment. I did not scream. I did not call them. I pulled a portable hard drive from my bag. For the next 3 hours, I systematically downloaded everything. I exported the raw database logs that showed the IP addresses used to access the accounts, IP addresses that I knew would match my father's home office and Austin's cell phone, not my computer. I downloaded the metadata of the digital signatures, which showed they were applied in batches at times when I could prove I was in meetings at Axis Meridian. I downloaded the invoices, the bank statements, the emails where my father asked me to leave the token key for the banking system because he might need to check a balance. I encrypted the folder with a military-grade algorithm. I saved one copy to the hard drive. I uploaded another copy to a secure cloud server that I had set up under a pseudonym, paying for the storage with a prepaid debit card bought at a grocery store. Then, I did something that felt like cutting off a limb. I printed the most damning documents, the ones that clearly showed the money flowing from Aubrey's company to Austin's campaign. I took these physical papers, a stack about an inch thick, and put them in my briefcase. These were the papers that are currently sitting in the hidden safe behind the false wall in my apartment. These are the papers Austin is looking for right now. He thinks they are in a file cabinet or under a mattress. He thinks he can just change the locks and rummage through my life until he finds the leverage he needs to keep me quiet. He does not know that the leverage is already weaponized. I left the office that evening at 9 o'clock. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black. I walked to my car, my briefcase heavy in my hand. I looked back at the Washington Impact Initiative building. With its tasteful gold lettering and its clean, modern lines, it looked so respectable. It looked so good. Inside my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I understood the endgame now. They were not planning to just let me take the fall if they got caught. They were planning to serve me up. The audit was coming. They knew the discrepancies would be found. They needed a villain, and they had spent 2 years costuming me for the role. If the music stopped, I was the one who was going to be left without a chair. And the chair they had reserved for me was made of steel and bolted to the floor of a federal penitentiary. I started the engine. The radio played a cheerful pop song, jarring against the silence in my head. They thought they were dealing with a daughter. They thought they were dealing with a subordinate. They forgot that they had hired me to be an expert in risk management. And looking at the evidence sitting on the passenger seat, I knew one thing for certain. They did not need to send me to a new apartment. They were preparing to send me to a place with doors that locked from the outside, a place called Federal Prison, and tonight, I was going to make sure that reservation was changed to the correct names. The drive to my parents' house that night felt less like a commute and more like a funeral procession for the person I used to be. I had the encrypted hard drive in my purse and the thin, damning stack of papers in a manila folder on the passenger seat. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my knees were shaking so hard I had to engage the cruise control just to keep the speed consistent. I did not call ahead. I walked into the house with the key I had possessed since I was 16, the key they were planning to take away from me tonight, and went straight to my father's study. It was a room designed to intimidate. The walls were lined with dark walnut paneling, and the air always smelled of lemon polish and unlit cigars. My father, Charles, was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, a fortress of wood that separated him from the rest of the world. My mother, Linda, was standing by the fireplace, arranging a vase of white hydrangeas. She looked up as I entered, her smile bright and reflexive, like a light switch being flipped. "Aubrey," she said, her voice a practiced melody of welcome. "We were not expecting you. Did you bring the revised guest list for the gala?" I did not return the smile. I walked forward and placed the folder on the center of the desk, right on top of my father's leather blotter. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was soft, but in the quiet of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. "I am not here for the guest list," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, lower, flatter, stripped of the deference I had spent 3 decades perfecting. "I am here to talk about AW strategic systems." The air in the room changed instantly. It was not a sudden explosion of anger. It was a drop in temperature. My father stopped writing. He slowly capped his fountain pen, aligning it perfectly with the edge of a notepad. He looked at the folder, then up at me, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if I had interrupted him to complain about the weather. "Aubrey," Charles sighed, leaning back in his chair. The leather creaked, a sound of expensive comfort. "It is late. I have had a long day with the zoning board." "I have had a long day too," I said, pointing at the folder. "I spent it looking at wire transfers. $74,000 in February, $93,000 in March, all of it funneling through a company registered in my name, signed with my digital key, and ending up in accounts that pay for Austin's campaign consultants." I paused, waiting for the denial. I expected them to act shocked. I expected them to claim identity theft, to call the police, to scream that we had been hacked. Instead, my father just shrugged. "You are overreacting," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You are looking at raw data without context. You do not understand high-level financial structuring. Aubrey, that is why we handle the strategy, and you handle the execution." "I understand theft," I replied, feeling a cold heat rising in my chest. "I understand fraud. I never signed those consulting agreements. I never opened those accounts." Linda stepped away from the fireplace. She moved toward me, not with aggression, but with that terrifying, suffocating warmth she used whenever she wanted something. She reached out to touch my arm, but I took a small, deliberate step back. Her hand hovered in the air for a moment before she smoothed her skirt. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do not use such ugly words. Fraud, theft. This is family business. We created that entity for you." "For me?" I asked, incredulous. "Of course," Linda said, widening her eyes as if the answer were obvious. "It is a vehicle, a way to build a credit history and a business profile for you. We are optimizing the tax burden for the foundation. Yes, but we are also creating a nest egg. When the time is right, that company will have a valuation. It is for your future." "My future involves a federal indictment if the IRS looks at this," I snapped. "You are using my identity to wash money for Austin. You are destroying my credit. There are loans in my name that are in default. Mother, is that part of the optimization strategy?" Charles slammed his hand down on the desk. The sound made the crystal decanter on the sidebar rattle. "Watch your tone," he barked. The veneer of the calm businessman vanished, replaced by the bully I had lived with my entire life. "You are standing in my house, eating food bought with my money, wearing clothes paid for by the salary I arranged for you. You should be grateful. Having your name on those papers gives you status. It gives you a seat at the table. Not everyone gets that kind of start in life." "I do not want a seat at a table that is going to be seized by the Department of Justice," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "I want the accounts closed. Tonight, I want every cent paid back to the foundation, and I want a written affidavit stating that I had no knowledge of these transactions." Charles laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You want? You are demanding things from me? After everything we have done for you? Who paid for your college? Aubrey? Who made the calls to get you into Axis Meridian? You think you got that job on merit?" The insult landed, but it didn't hurt the way he intended. It clarified things. It stripped away the illusion that he respected me even a little bit. "I keep that job on merit," I said quietly, "and I will not lose it because you want to play political games with Austin." Then, Linda spoke, and what she said was so quiet, so matter-of-fact, that it froze the blood in my veins. She walked around the desk and stood next to Charles, placing a hand on his shoulder. They looked like a portrait of power, united, impenetrable. She looked at me with a gaze that was entirely devoid of maternal instinct. It was the look of a general assessing a soldier who was refusing to march into a minefield. "Aubrey, listen to reason," she said softly. "We cannot close the accounts. The audit is starting. If we move the money now, it raises flags. We have to ride it out." "And if the auditors find it?" I asked. "They won't," she said confidently. Then she paused, and her expression shifted. A tiny, cruel smile played at the corners of her mouth. "But if they do, well, look at the paperwork. Darling, the org chart is very clear. You are the operations manager. You are the independent contractor. Your father and I? We are just the board of directors. We rely on the reports provided by our staff. If there was mismanagement, the paper trail shows exactly who was pressing the buttons." The silence that followed was absolute. I stared at them. I looked at the woman who had packed my school lunches and the man who had taught me to ride a bike, and I finally saw them for what they were. They weren't just using me. They had built a trap door beneath my feet 5 years ago, waiting for the day they might need to pull the lever. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had pre-assigned the blame. "You set me up," I whispered. It wasn't a question. "We protected the family," Charles corrected, leaning forward. "And you are part of the family. If you play your part, if you keep your mouth shut and let us handle the auditors, we will take care of you. When this blows over, we can buy you a new condo, maybe in the city. We can set up a trust for your future children. You will never have to worry about money again." "But if you make a scene," Linda added, her voice sweet as poison, "if you try to run to the authorities, well, who are they going to believe? The pillars of the community? Or the daughter with the maxed-out credit cards and the secret consulting firm?" It was a perfect checkmate, or at least, they thought it was. I looked at the folder on the desk. I thought about the copies I had already sent to the encrypted cloud. I thought about the forensic timeline I had built. I stood up straighter. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. The breaking of a bond I hadn't realized was strangling me. "I am not your employee," I said. My voice was steady now. "I am not your insurance policy, and I am certainly not your shield." "Aubrey, sit down," Charles commanded, pointing a finger at the leather chair opposite him. "No," I said. I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct ingrained in me since birth screamed to turn around, to apologize, to fix it, to make them happy, but I kept walking toward the heavy oak door. "If you walk out that door, you are on your own," Charles called out. His voice was rising, cracking with disbelief. "You cut yourself off. Do you hear me?" "Aubrey," Linda's voice was sharper, tinged with panic for the first time. "Think about what you are throwing away." I stopped with my hand on the brass doorknob. I looked back over my shoulder. Linda was still standing by the desk, but she wasn't looking at me with love. She was looking at me the way a stockbroker looks at a ticker tape when a company crashes. She was calculating the loss. She realized that the asset she had groomed for 34 years had just walked off the ledger. "I am not throwing anything away," I said. "I am returning the merchandise." I opened the door and walked out. I didn't slam it. I closed it gently, with a definitive click. I walked through the silent hallway, past the family photos that were lies framed in silver, and out into the cool night air. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. My fingers numb. It was a text from Austin. Mom says you are freaking out about the paperwork. Calm down. Sis, this is just how grown-ups do business. Let the adults handle the strategy, okay? You just focus on your little spreadsheets. See you Sunday. I stared at the screen. Grown-ups, little spreadsheets. He didn't even know. He was so protected, so insulated by the bubble my parents had built around him, that he thought this was just a minor administrative hiccup. He thought I was just a hysterical secretary who needed to be patted on the head. I did not reply. I got into my car and locked the doors. I sat there in the dark driveway for a long time, staring at the lit windows of the house where I had grown up. I realized then that my childhood hadn't ended when I turned 18, or when I graduated college, or when I got my first job. It had ended tonight, right now, at the age of 34. The grief washed over me, heavy and suffocating, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something colder, something necessary. I was no longer a daughter dealing with difficult parents. I was an independent contractor dealing with a hostile corporate entity. I was a witness dealing with a criminal organization. I started the engine. I put the car in reverse. I backed out of the driveway, leaving the house and the illusion behind me. They wanted a fight? They wanted to use the rules of high finance and legal structuring to crush me? Fine. They forgot one thing. I was the one who wrote the operations manual. I drove toward the highway, not toward my apartment, but toward the office of a private investigator named Mason Keller. The time for being the good daughter was over. It was time to become the liability they were so afraid of. The morning after I walked out of my parents' house, I did not cry. I did not stay in bed. I went to work at Axis Meridian Logistics, poured myself a black coffee, and treated the destruction of my family ties like a failing supply chain node. When a road is compromised, you do not mourn it. You bypass it. You secure the cargo. You eliminate the vulnerability. I needed a specialist, not a family lawyer who played golf with my father, but a shark who smelled blood in the water. I found Mason Keller through a contact in our corporate security division. Mason operated out of a converted loft in the industrial district, a space that smelled of stale tobacco and printer toner. He was a forensic accountant turned private investigator, a man who viewed spreadsheets as crime scenes. I sat on a folding chair across from him and handed over the encrypted hard drive. I need you to look for the intent, I told him. I know the money is gone. I need you to prove they plan to make me the fall guy from day one. Mason called me 3 days later. He did not ask how I was doing. He simply said, "We need to meet. Bring a notebook." When I arrived, he had taped a flowchart to his whiteboard. It was a chaotic web of red lines connecting the Washington Impact Initiative to AW Strategic Systems, and then to various vendors associated with Austin's campaign. But it was the stack of printed emails on his desk that made my blood run cold. "You were right about the setup," Mason said, sliding a piece of paper toward me. "But it is more organized than you thought. Look at this." It was an email chain between Austin and the family's longtime legal advisor, dated 6 months prior. The subject line was simply, "Contingency Protocol." I read the words, and the air left the room. Austin had written, "If the grant audit happens, we need a narrative for the discrepancies. Can we frame it as operational negligence? Aubrey has been overwhelmed at her day job. It is plausible she lost track of the vendor vetting process." The lawyer's reply was even worse. "Negligence is good, but fraud is cleaner. If she confesses to creating the vendor for personal debt relief, the foundation is the victim. We can protect the board from liability." "They were scripting my confession," I said, my voice barely a whisper. 6 months ago, we were having Sunday dinner, and they were deciding which felony I would plead guilty to. "It gets worse," Mason said. He hesitated, looking at me with a rare flicker of pity. "I gained access to the cloud backups of your mother's text messages. You need to see this." He handed me a screenshot. It was a conversation between Linda and a political strategist named Jerry, a man who specialized in spinning disasters into votes. "Linda, if we have to burn her, how does it play for Austin?" "Jerry, it plays great. The golden boy with the tragic, troubled sister. He stands by her, gets her help, shows his compassion. Voters love a redemption arc, especially if the candidate is the saint and the sibling is the sinner. We can spin it as a drug problem or a gambling addiction. Whatever explains the money. Linda. Okay, keep that in your pocket, just in case. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. My mother, the woman who claimed she wanted to protect me. She wasn't just willing to send me to prison. She was planning to use my destruction as a campaign slogan. She was going to paint me as an addict or a thief to make Austin look saintly. I put the paper down. Okay, I said. That is enough. What do you want to do? Mason asked. We have enough to go to the police now. No, I said, standing up. If I go to the police now, they will hire high-priced defense teams. They will bury me in motions and delays. They will leak the troubled sister story to the press before I can even testify. I need to be smarter. I need to be undeniable. I left Mason's office and drove straight to the glass tower downtown where Sonia Blake practiced law. Sonia was a criminal defense attorney who had a reputation for shredding white-collar criminals. She listened to me for an hour, reviewing the documents Mason had found. We are going to prepare a proffer, Sonia said, leaning back in her chair. We go to the United States Attorney. We offer them everything. The flow of funds, the emails, the texts. You become the cooperating witness. You get immunity. They get the big fish. But we do not file it yet, I said. I need time to secure my position. Aubrey, Sonia warned, every day you wait is a risk. If they realize you know, they could destroy evidence. They won't destroy it, I said. They are arrogant. They think I am pouting. They think I am waiting for an apology. I need 2 weeks. I spent those 2 weeks turning my life into a fortress. I knew my family. I knew that when the hammer dropped, they would come for my physical space. They would try to seize my laptop, my files, anything they could use to blackmail me. I lived in a pre-war building with thick walls, and I used that to my advantage. I hired a contractor from out of state, a man who specialized in safe rooms for high-net-worth clients. He arrived at midnight and worked for 2 shifts, in my home office, behind a heavy built-in bookshelf filled with logistics textbooks and classic novels. We installed a steel frame. It wasn't just a safe. It was a panic room the size of a walk-in closet. The bookshelf was mounted on a heavy-duty hinge, activated not by a pulled book, that was for movies, but by a magnetic sensor hidden in the molding that required a specific fob to release. Inside, I set up a separate server. I installed a hardline internet connection that bypassed my main router. I placed a copy of every document, every email, and every recording on a drive that was bolted to the floor. Then, I installed the cameras. I put pinhole cameras in the living room, the hallway, and the office. I connected them to a cloud server that instantly uploaded footage to 3 separate locations, one in Sonia's office, one on a server in Switzerland, and one to the secure drive in the hidden room. Finally, I coded the alert system. I linked my apartment's smart home hub to a custom script. If the front door lock was engaged by a locksmith's tool, or if the digital code was reset from an external source, my phone would scream. I was building a mousetrap, and I knew exactly which rats were coming for the cheese. 3 days before the anniversary party, I met Sonia again. We finalized the packet for the prosecutor. It was a heavy binder, 3 inches thick. "This is lethal," Sonia said, tapping the cover. "Once we hand this over, there is no going back. Your parents will go to prison. Your brother will never hold office. The scandal will be absolute." "They wanted a scandal," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "They wanted to create a story about a tragic sister. I am just editing the script." "Why wait for the party?" Sonia asked again. "Why not do it Monday morning?" "Because Monday morning is quiet," I replied. "If they get arrested on a Monday, they can spin it. They can put out a press release. They can call in favors." I looked out the window. The anniversary gala is the biggest event of the year. Every donor, every judge, every reporter in the county will be there. They are going to stand on stage and talk about integrity. They are going to talk about the Washington legacy. I turned back to Sonia. I want them to be arrested while the applause is still ringing in their ears. I want the cameras to capture the look on my mother's face when she realizes her narrative has been hijacked. I want there to be so many witnesses that they cannot lie their way out of it. Sonia nodded slowly. It is theatrical, but effective. It is logistics, I corrected. Maximum impact, minimal recovery time. On the night of the party, before I put on my dress, I stood in my office. I held the magnetic fob to the molding. There was a soft thunk, and the bookshelf swung open silently, inside. The green lights of the server blinked in the darkness. I placed the original hard drive inside. I closed the shelf. It looked perfectly innocent. Just a wall of books in the apartment of a boring, responsible logistics manager. I looked at the front door. I knew that in a few hours, Austin would be standing there with a locksmith. He would think he was breaking into a vulnerable apartment. He would think he was about to erase me. I held up the fob, a small piece of black plastic that looked like nothing, but unlocked everything. They wanted to change the locks on my apartment to keep me out. They wanted to lock me out of the family, out of the money, out of the truth. I slipped the fob into my clutch purse. Go ahead, I whispered to the empty room. Change the locks. I'm going to change the story. I walked out the door, locking it behind me, and headed to the Crescent Lake Country Hall to watch my family celebrate their own demise. The vibration against my thigh was not a text message. It was a sustained, rhythmic pulse, a specific haptic pattern I had coded into the security protocol myself. It felt like a second heartbeat, urgent and artificial, cutting through the ambient jazz and the murmur of polite conversation. I was standing by the mahogany bar at the far end of the ballroom, clutching a fresh club soda that I had no intention of drinking. On the stage, 50 feet away, my parents were a portrait of benevolent success. My father, Charles, stood with his arm around my mother's waist. My mother, Linda, held a microphone with the delicate grace of a lounge singer, her other hand gesturing expansively to the crowd of donors and local dignitaries. At the Washington Impact Initiative, Linda said, her voice amplified and warm, we believe that the foundation of any great community is trust. It is about transparency. It is about having nothing to hide. The crowd murmured their agreement, a sea of nodding heads and glittering jewelry. I lowered my eyes to the phone concealed in the palm of my hand. The screen was no longer showing the catering schedule. It had switched to the interface of my secure home monitoring system. A banner notification flashed in crimson across the top. Administrative override requested. Unknown device. I tapped the notification, and the screen split into a grid of live feeds. There was nothing transparent about what was happening on the screen. The camera mounted above my apartment door, a tiny lens hidden inside the peephole housing, showed the hallway in high-definition clarity. My brother, Austin, was standing on my welcome mat. He was not alone. Beside him stood a man in blue coveralls, kneeling before my door with a heavy-duty drill in his hands. Austin looked impatient. He checked his watch, then glanced down the hallway, his body language radiating a nervous, aggressive energy. He was wearing the same suit he had worn to the cocktail hour, but he had removed his tie, and his collar was unbuttoned. He looked like a man who had left a party to handle a dirty job. How much longer? I could hear Austin's voice through the app, tinny but distinct. Almost got it, Mr. Washington, the locksmith grunted. This is a serious deadbolt. High security. Just get it open, Austin snapped. My sister is having a mental health crisis. We need to secure the premises before she hurts herself. I watched, my face impassive. As he handed the locksmith a clipboard, I zoomed in on the document. Even on the small screen, I recognized the header. It was the power of attorney form, the one with the digital signature I had never authorized, the one Mason Keller had flagged as a forgery. We believe in open doors, my mother said from the stage, her voice soaring. We believe that when you have the courage to let the light in, you banish the shadows. I looked up. Linda caught my eye. She beamed at me, a radiant, triumphant smile. She thought she had won. She thought her son was currently erasing her liability while she charmed the checkbooks of the city's elite. I looked back down. On the screen, the lock gave way with a loud metallic crack. The locksmith stood up, wiping metal shavings from his pants. Austin didn't thank him. He pushed the door open and stepped into my sanctuary. "Wait here," Austin ordered the man. "I need to check the interior." He stepped across the threshold. I switched the camera view. The feed jumped to the wide-angle lens hidden in the smoke detector in my living room. Austin walked in, looking around with a predatory intensity. He expected chaos. He expected to find stacks of bank statements, frantic notes, maybe packed suitcases indicating I was planning to run. He expected the apartment of a guilty woman. What he found was a showroom. I had spent the last 72 hours purging the apartment. The surfaces were gleaming and bare. The coffee table held a single art book. The throw pillows were fluffed. There were no papers, no laptops, no hard drives. It looked like a hotel suite, impersonal and cold. Austin stopped in the middle of the living room, spinning around. Confusion clouded his face. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect gel style. He walked to the sideboard and yanked open the drawers. Empty. He went to the coat closet and threw it open, shoving my winter coats aside. Nothing but wool and hangers. "Where is it?" I saw his lips move. "Where's the damn laptop?" He turned and marched down the hallway toward the second bedroom, the one I used as a home office. I tapped the screen again to follow him. The camera in the office was concealed within the spine of a fake encyclopedia on the bottom shelf. It gave a perfect, low-angle view of the room. Austin burst in. He went straight to the desk, a sleek, modern glass table I had bought specifically for this deception. There was a computer monitor there, but no tower, no laptop, just a wireless keyboard and a mouse sitting on an empty glass surface. He pulled the drawers of the filing cabinet open so hard the entire unit rattled. He grabbed a handful of hanging folders and threw them onto the floor. They were empty. "Damn it!" he shouted. The sound was sharp enough to distort the microphone audio for a second. He kicked the empty filing cabinet. I took a sip of my club soda. The bubbles were flat, but the satisfaction tasting like iron in my mouth was sharp. He was looking for the paper trail of his own corruption, and he was finding nothing but air. He stood panting in the middle of the room. He looked around wildly. His eyes scanned the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Then, his gaze landed on the bookshelf. The bookshelf. It was a floor-to-ceiling unit made of dark oak, filled with heavy logistics textbooks, novels, and framed photos of landscapes. No family photos. Behind that shelf was the steel-reinforced door to the panic room. Behind that shelf was the server blinking with the green light of the upload. Behind that shelf was the hard drive containing the evidence that would send him to prison for 15 years. Austin walked toward it. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with anticipation. He reached out and grabbed a book. He pulled it off the shelf and shook it, as if expecting a flash drive to fall out. He threw it on the floor. He grabbed another, then he grabbed the shelf itself. He pulled on the wood. The shelf did not budge. It was locked by a magnetic seal that required the fob currently sitting in my clutch purse. To him, it felt like a solid wall. He banged his fist against the wood. Thud, thud. "Smart move, Aubrey," he muttered. "Hide everything off-site." He didn't know how close he was. He was standing 6 inches away from his own destruction. I triggered the command. With a subtle slide of my thumb on the screen, I activated the Zone 4 intrusion protocol. The camera in the bookshelf switched from passive recording to active forensic logging. A red border appeared around the video feed on my phone. The system began capturing high-resolution bursts of his face, the anger, the sweat, the intent. Simultaneously, a background process initiated. I saw the status bar fill up rapidly as the video clip was packaged and encrypted. Uploading to Server A, Sonia Blake. Uploading to Server B, Mason Keller. Uploading to Secure Cloud. I watched him tear a painting off the wall, a generic watercolor of a sailboat, and check behind it for a wall safe. He was getting destructive now. He was destroying my property in a desperate attempt to find the leverage his parents had promised him was there. My phone vibrated with a text message. I didn't close the security app. I just let the banner slide down. Mom, you look so serious. Darling, remember to smile. People are watching. Fix your face. I read the text, then I looked up at the stage. Linda was accepting a bouquet of roses from the mayor. She looked over the flowers and found me in the crowd. She made a tiny, sharp gesture with her head, a command to perk up, to play the role of the grateful daughter. I looked back down at the screen. Austin was now using a letter opener he had found to pry at the baseboards, looking for a floor safe. The juxtaposition was almost artistic. The mother, bathed in light, demanding a smile, the son, cloaked in shadow, committing a felony break-in on her orders, and me, the daughter, holding the remote control to the entire performance. I did not smile, but I did not frown, either. I stood with the absolute stillness of a hunter who has just heard the trap snap shut. I could have called the police right then. I could have tapped the panic button on the app, and the silent alarm would have summoned a patrol car to my apartment within 8 minutes. They would have caught Austin red-handed, destroying my office. But that wasn't the plan. An arrest for breaking and entering was messy. It could be pleaded down. He could claim he was checking on my welfare. He could claim he had a key. It was a domestic dispute. No, I needed him to finish. I needed him to leave empty-handed. I needed the footage of him using the forged power of attorney. I needed the log of him entering without my permission. And most of all, I needed him to report back to Charles and Linda that the apartment was clean. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to think they had missed the evidence. Not that the evidence was already in the hands of the United States Attorney. On the screen, Austin threw the letter opener across the room. It hit the glass desk with a crack. He pulled out his phone and dialed. I couldn't hear the other side of the call, but I could hear him. "It is empty," he hissed into the phone. I mean totally empty. She scrubbed it. "No. I checked the vents. No. I checked the closet. Mom, there is nothing here. It is like a hotel room. Yeah, I am leaving now. I am going to have the locksmith put the new deadbolt on anyway. At least we lock her out." He hung up. He looked around the room one last time, his eyes lingering on the bookshelf again. He reached out and ran his hand along the wood, right over the hidden seam. He paused. I held my breath. Then he turned around and walked out. I watched him exit the apartment. I watched him instruct the locksmith to install the new cylinder. I watched him pay the man with cash from a thick envelope, money that undoubtedly came from the charity account. A final notification popped up on my screen, green and bright against the dark video feed. Incident report generated. Recipient, Blake, Sonia, attorney at law. Status, sent. I exhaled, a long, slow breath that released the tension in my shoulders. Austin had changed the locks. He had the new key in his pocket. He thought he had trapped me. He didn't realize that by walking into that apartment and signing that work order with a forged signature, he had just handed me the final nail for his own coffin. I slid the phone back into my clutch. I picked up my club soda. The ice had melted, watering it down, but I took a drink anyway. I looked toward the stage. The speeches were ending. The band was starting to play a waltz. My parents were descending the stairs, moving into the crowd to receive their adoration. Phase 1 was complete. The trap was primed. The evidence was secured. Now, it was time for Phase 2. It was time to tell them exactly who owned the building, the master of ceremonies. A man with a tan so deep it looked like varnished mahogany. Tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the cavernous ballroom of Crescent Lake Country Hall, silencing the murmur of 300 wealthy guests. The lights dimmed, focusing 2 sharp beams onto the stage where my parents stood. They held hands. They looked like the bride and groom atop a very expensive, very stale wedding cake. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC boomed, his voice dripping with synthetic reverence, "please join me in honoring a couple who define the spirit of our city. 30 years of marriage, 15 years of the Washington Impact Initiative, the heart and soul of Riverton, Charles and Linda Washington." The applause was polite but enthusiastic, the sound of manicured hands clapping together. I stood in the shadows near a marble pillar, sipping my warm soda, watching the performance with the detached fascination of a sociologist studying a colony of apex predators. My mother stepped forward. She adjusted the microphone stand, lowering it slightly to appear smaller, more approachable. It was a calculated move. Everything she did was calculated. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling just enough to suggest humility. "Standing here tonight, looking at all your beautiful faces, I am taken back to 30 years ago. Charles and I had nothing but a drafty apartment and big dreams. We started this journey with 2 bare hands and hearts full of hope." I stifled a laugh. 30 years ago, my father had a trust fund and my mother had a debutante's inheritance. The drafty apartment was a penthouse in the financial district, but the truth is boring. Donors do not write checks for truth. They write checks for mythology. She spun the tale of their rise, weaving a narrative of sacrifice and community service. She spoke of the long nights and the hard choices, painting a portrait of a family that bled for the greater good. It was masterful. If I did not know that the diamond on her finger was paid for by skimming off a veteran's housing grant, I might have teared up myself. Then came the introductions. "We did not build this alone," Linda said, her eyes shining. "We built it for the future, and that future has a name." She swept her arm toward the side of the stage where a large digital projection of my brother's face appeared, smiling, airbrushed, senatorial. "Our son, Austin, he is the energy, the passion, the one who will carry our torch into the city council and beyond." The room erupted. Austin was not even in the building. He was currently committing a felony in my apartment, but the idea of him was enough to make them cheer. They were cheering for the continuation of the status quo, for the young prince who would ensure their zoning variances were approved. "And of course," Linda continued, her tone shifting. The warmth didn't leave her voice, but the wattage dropped. It became the tone one uses to praise a reliable housekeeper. "Our daughter, Aubrey." She didn't gesture to a photo. She just gestured vaguely to the room. "Aubrey is the quiet strength of this family," Linda said, smiling a smile that did not reach her eyes. "While Austin dreams of the horizon, Aubrey keeps our feet on the ground. She is the one who handles the small details. She manages the little things so that Charles and I can focus on the big picture." The small details. The phrase hit me like a physical blow, breathless and sharp. The small details were the wire transfers she was too lazy to execute. The small details were the tax evasion schemes I was forced to legitimize. The small details were the sleepless nights I spent balancing ledgers so she could sleep on Egyptian cotton. To her, my entire existence was a small detail. I was the grout between the tiles of their magnificence, necessary to hold it together, but meant to be walked on and ignored. A woman standing near me turned. I recognized her as Mrs. Vanderhoven, the wife of a federal judge. She was draped in emerald silk and smelled of expensive gin. "Oh, you are the daughter?" she said, looking me up and down. "I heard what your mother said. It must be so satisfying to be the engine room of such an empire." She meant it as a compliment, I suppose, but her eyes betrayed her. She looked at me with pity. She saw a woman in a sensible dress standing in the corner while her brother's face was projected 20 feet high. "How does it feel?" she asked, tilting her head. "Being the one behind the curtain while they get all the applause?" I smiled at her. It was the sharpest smile I had ever worn. "It is educational, Mrs. Vanderhoven," I said softly. "The thing about being behind the curtain is that you see the wires, you see the trapdoors, you see the things the audience is never meant to know exist." She blinked, confused by the edge in my voice. "Oh, well, that is nice." She drifted away, sensing a danger she couldn't name. My phone vibrated in my clutch. It was a single, long buzz, an email. I checked it discreetly, shielding the screen with my body. It was from Mason Keller. Subject: Analysis complete. Body: We have them. The forensic handwriting expert just signed the affidavit. The pressure variance on the digital signature proves it was a copy-paste job, not a live signing. It matches the timestamp of your father's login, not yours. I have sent the package to the prosecutor. Meeting confirmed for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I felt a rush of adrenaline that made my fingertips tingle. It was done. The weapon was loaded. On stage, Linda was winding down. "Family," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone caught and amplified. "In a world that changes so fast, family is the one place where we are safe. It is the one place where we can trust completely." As she said the word trust, my security app sent a priority alert. I tapped the notification. The feed from my apartment office opened. Austin was back in the frame. He must have found the decoy laptop, an old battered machine I had left in the bottom drawer of the closet, the one I used for streaming movies in bed. I had wiped it clean of everything except for one specific folder on the desktop. I watched him on the small screen. He was sitting at my glass desk, the blue light of the monitor illuminating his frantic face. He looked sweaty. His tie was gone. He was clicking the mouse aggressively. He had found the folder. I had named the folder Liability. I knew my brother. I knew that if he saw a folder named Taxes or Photos, he might skip it. But Liability? That was the language of our family. That was the currency we traded in. He couldn't resist it. On the screen, I saw him double-click. He leaned in, his eyes scanning the file list. There was only one file inside. It was an audio file. I had named it, "While Everyone Is Here, MP3. I almost laughed out loud. The timing was cosmic. In the ballroom, my mother was talking about trust. In my apartment, her son was about to click play on a recording of her own voice betraying that trust. The file contained a conversation I had recorded 6 weeks ago, the day I tried to confront them about the credit card debt. In it, Linda's voice was crystal clear. "We cannot put the assets in your name, Aubrey. It is too risky. If the investigation happens, the accounts need to be traceable to you, not the foundation. You are the expendable asset here. Austin is the legacy." I watched Austin's face on the screen. He clicked the file. I couldn't hear the audio through the camera feed, but I didn't need to. I saw the color drain from his face. I saw his mouth fall open. I saw him slump back in the chair. The arrogance finally knocked out of him. He wasn't listening to a sister he could bully. He was listening to his mother plotting a crime. And more importantly, he was realizing that I had recorded it. He was realizing that the small detail daughter had been documenting their sins in high fidelity. On stage, Linda raised her glass. "To the Washington legacy," she cried. "To the legacy," the crowd roared. I looked at my phone. Austin was staring at the laptop screen with pure horror. He grabbed his hair with both hands. He looked at the camera lens, the fake encyclopedia spine, as if he suddenly felt my eyes on him. He knew, in that second, he knew the game was over. He grabbed the laptop and slammed it shut, as if closing the computer could silence the truth. But he was too late. The file was just a copy. The original was in the panic room behind the wall he couldn't open. The duplicate was with the prosecutor. I slipped the phone back into my purse. I looked at my mother. She was glowing, basking in the adoration, convinced she was the protagonist of this story. She thought I was just a prop. She thought she could rewrite my life, edit out my future, and use me as a plot device for her son's redemption. She was wrong. I wasn't a prop. I was the playwright. And I had just decided that this was not going to be a tragedy about a daughter's sacrifice. It was going to be a courtroom drama. I took a deep breath. The air in the ballroom felt thin. Recycled. I needed to leave. I needed to get to the car, to verify the upload, to prepare for the meeting with the prosecutor. But I didn't run. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw my drink. I smoothed my dress. I nodded politely to Mrs. Vanderhoven, who was still watching me with confusion. "Enjoy the rest of the show," I told her. "The finale is going to be unforgettable." I turned my back on the stage, on the applause, on the lie. I walked toward the exit signs glowing red in the distance. I was done standing in the wings. It was time to bring the house lights up and show everyone exactly what was rotting on the stage. As I pushed through the heavy double doors, leaving the noise of the party behind, I checked the time. 9:15. The police would have the warrant by morning. My mother wanted to focus on the big picture? Fine. I was about to give her a mugshot. That was a big enough picture for anyone. I waited until the applause had died down and the band had transitioned into a soft, harmless jazz standard. My parents were standing near the foot of the stage, accepting congratulations like monarchs holding court. My father, Charles, was laughing at a joke made by a real estate developer, his head thrown back in a performance of easy camaraderie. My mother, Linda, was holding the hand of the mayor's wife, radiating that specific brand of warmth she reserved for people with a net worth over $10 million. I approached them with the clipboard I had borrowed from the event coordinator. It was a simple prop, but in the visual language of the Washington family, a clipboard meant business. It meant a problem needed solving. "Mother, Father," I said, keeping my voice low and urgent. "We have a situation with a donor. The Table 5 pledge." My father's smile vanished instantly. Table 5 was the heavy hitters, the venture capitalists from the coast. "What kind of situation?" "Not here," I said, glancing around nervously as if protecting their reputation. "It is sensitive. We need a private room, just for 5 minutes." They followed me without question. They were trained to respond to financial threats with immediate, discreet action. I led them away from the ballroom, down a corridor lined with portraits of past club presidents, to the VIP cloakroom. It was a small, oppressive space meant for high-stakes conversations, lined with dark velvet wallpaper and smelling of cedar and old money. I closed the door. The sound of the party, the clinking glasses, the saxophone, the laughter, was instantly cut off, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt pressurized. "Well?" Charles demanded, adjusting his tuxedo cuffs. He looked annoyed, the way a CEO looks when a junior analyst interrupts his lunch. "Who is it? Is it the zoning commissioner? Did he back out of the pledge?" "There is no donor issue," I said calmly. I walked to the small circular table in the center of the room and placed my phone on the polished wood surface. Linda's eyes narrowed. The mask of the benevolent matriarch slipped, revealing the sharp, calculating woman underneath. "Aubrey, this is hardly the time for dramatic games. We have guests." "We do," I agreed. "And one of them is currently breaking into my apartment." I tapped the screen. I did not play the video of Austin yet. Instead, I opened the audio file I had queued up, the one labeled "While Everyone is Here." I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the small room. It was not the projected, melodic voice she had used on stage 10 minutes ago. It was her kitchen table voice, flat, pragmatic, and utterly ruthless. "We cannot put the assets in your name. Aubrey, it is too risky. If the investigation happens, the accounts need to be traceable to you, not the foundation. You are the expendable asset here. Austin is the legacy." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of recognition. Charles stood perfectly still, his face draining of color until it matched his white dress shirt. Linda stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake that had just materialized on the table. For 10 seconds, no one breathed. Charles was the first to recover. He did not look ashamed. He looked furious. He stepped toward me, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "You wiretapped us," he hissed. "You sat at our table, ate our food, and recorded a private conversation? That is illegal. Aubrey, it is inadmissible. You edited that. You cut it out of context." "It is not edited," I said, my voice cool and even, like I was reading a bill of lading. "And it is not illegal in this state. More importantly, the file was uploaded to a secure cloud server the moment it was recorded. The metadata is time-stamped. It has been verified by a forensic audio specialist. It proves intent to defraud. It proves conspiracy." "Conspiracy?" Charles scoffed, though his voice cracked slightly. "Do not be ridiculous. We were protecting the family interests. You do not understand the pressure we are under." "I understand the pressure perfectly," I said. "I am the one you decided to crush with it." I swiped the screen of my phone. The image changed. It was no longer the audio interface. It was a high-resolution still frame taken from the camera hidden in my bookshelf. It showed Austin, sweaty and frantic, ripping a painting off my office wall. In his other hand, he held the forged power of attorney document. "And this," I said, pointing to the screen, "is your legacy. This is Austin, 40 minutes ago, inside my apartment. He used a locksmith. He used a document with a signature that I did not sign. That is breaking and entering. That is forgery. And since he was looking for financial documents to destroy, it is also obstruction of justice." Linda made a sound, a small, strangled gasp. She reached out and touched the screen, her finger hovering over Austin's face. "He was just—" She stopped. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear for me, fear of me. "I am not the doorkeeper for this family anymore," I said. I stood straight, my shoulders back, looking them both in the eye. "I am not the fixer. I am not the one who handles the small details. I am the one holding the evidence." I expected them to yell. I expected Charles to threaten me with physical violence or Linda to scream. But they did something far worse. They began to negotiate. Linda's face softened. It was a terrifying transformation. She melted from the shocked socialite into the grieving mother. She took a step toward me, her hands clasped in a pleading gesture. "Aubrey, darling," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Please, look at the big picture. Austin, he is so close. The city council seat is practically his. If this comes out, if even a rumor of this comes out, he is finished. His life is over." "He should have thought of that before he broke into my home," I said. "He did it for us," Linda implored. "He did it to save the family name. And think about yourself. Aubrey, you hate the spotlight. You have always been so shy, so private. Do you really want to be dragged through a public trial? Do you want reporters camping on your lawn? We are trying to protect you from that. If you take the blame, we can handle it quietly. A fine, probation. We have lawyers who can make it go away. But if you fight us, it becomes a spectacle." I looked at her with clinical detachment. She was actually trying to convince me that going to prison for her crime was a favor to my introvert nature. "You are asking me to be a felon," I said, "so Austin can be a councilman." "We are asking you to be a sister," Charles interrupted. He moved to stand next to Linda, switching tactics from intimidation to bribery. He was the businessman now, trying to salvage a deal gone bad. "Let's be reasonable," Charles said. He smoothed his tie. "Everyone has a price. Aubrey, we know you have been unhappy with your apartment. We can fix that. We can transfer the deed to the lake house into your name. Tomorrow. No, tonight. We can write up a contract right now." He saw I wasn't moving, so he raised the stakes. "A trust fund," he said quickly. $5 million, irrevocable. You can leave Axis Meridian, you can travel, you can start your own business. A real one, not just the shell company. You can have complete financial independence. All you have to do is hand over that phone, give us the passwords to the cloud, and sign a statement saying you authorize the transfers. I looked at them. I looked at the father offering me money to sell my soul. I looked at the mother begging me to jump on a grenade to save her golden boy. I analyzed them like a balance sheet. Assets. None. Their love was a depreciating asset that had hit zero value years ago. Liabilities. Infinite. They were a risk I could no longer afford to carry. There was no apology. Not once in this entire conversation had either of them said, "We are sorry we hurt you." They had only said, "We are sorry you caught us." They were not parents. They were risk managers trying to contain a leak. "You want to negotiate?" I asked Saab. Charles nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly. We are a family. We solve problems internally." "I am afraid that is impossible," I said. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my clutch. The data is not just on this phone, I informed them. 3 hours ago, I met with Sonia Blake. You know her, don't you? The criminal defense attorney. Charles flinched at the name. Sonia Blake was known as the executioner in corporate legal circles. Sonia has the hard drive, I continued. Mason Keller has the forensic reports, and as of 8 o'clock this morning, the United States Attorney for the Southern District has the preliminary proffer. I signed a cooperation agreement. Father, I am not a suspect. I am a witness. Charles staggered back as if I had physically struck him. He gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. You went to the feds? I did not have a choice, I said. You were planning to frame me. I just got to the prosecutor first. You can recant, Linda said desperately, grabbing my arm. Her nails dug into my skin through the silk of my dress. Tell them you were confused. Tell them you were off your medication. We can get a doctor to testify you are unstable. I looked down at her hand on my arm. I did not pull away. I just looked at it until she released me, unsettled by my lack of reaction. It is too late for that, I said. The digital footprint is undeniable. The timeline is set. The investigation is already open. What I am doing tonight, telling you this now, is not a negotiation. It is a courtesy. I wanted you to know that the narrative has changed before the handcuffs go on. Courtesy? Linda screamed. The mask was gone completely now. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. You are destroying this family. You are burning everything we built. After everything we gave you, you ungrateful, spiteful little... I am not destroying the family, I interrupted, my voice cutting through her scream like a blade of ice. I walked to the door and placed my hand on the handle. I looked back at them one last time. They looked small in the velvet-lined room. They looked trapped. I am just ceasing to cover up what you already broke, I said. I am closing the account. I opened the door. The sounds of the party rushed back in. Laughter, music, the clinking of champagne flutes. It sounded absurdly cheerful. A soundtrack for a funeral. Aubrey, Charles shouted after me, his voice cracking with desperation. If you walk out there, you are dead to us. I didn't turn around. I stepped out into the hallway and let the door click shut behind me, sealing them in the silence of their own making. I was dead to them? No. I had just come alive for the first time in 34 years. I had my hand on the brass handle of the cloakroom door, ready to step back into the gala, when my father's hand slammed against the wood, holding it shut. The sound was sharp, a violent crack that vibrated through the small room. I turned slowly. Charles was no longer the composed patriarch. His face was flushed, a vein pulsing dangerously in his temple. He was not looking at me with anger anymore. He was looking at me with the terrifying calculation of a man who realizes he has to shoot a lame horse. You think you have the upper hand because of a few recordings? Charles said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You think we did not prepare for this? You think we built an empire by leaving loose ends? He took a step closer, invading my personal space. If you go to the authorities, he hissed, we will not just fight you on the fraud charges. We will pivot. We will release the medical files. I do not have medical files, I said, confused by his bluff. I am perfectly healthy. We have the files we created, he corrected, a cruel smile touching his lips. We have statements from concerned friends about your erratic behavior. We have edited clips from the security cameras at the office showing you shouting at empty rooms, context removed. Of course, we have a psychiatrist on retainer who has never met you, but has reviewed your case history and is ready to testify that you suffer from paranoid delusions and early-onset schizophrenia. I stared at him, the coldness in my chest spread to my stomach. They weren't just going to frame me for theft. They were going to dismantle my mind. They were going to gaslight the entire legal system into believing I was insane, so that my testimony would be dismissed as the ravings of a sick woman. It is a simple narrative, Aubrey, Charles continued, seeing my shock. The jealous, unstable sister who invented a conspiracy because she could not handle her brother's success. Who will the jury believe? The pillars of the community, or the spinster daughter with a history of mental breaks. Linda stepped forward then. She reached into her clutch, the same sparkling Judith Lieber bag that cost more than my first car, and pulled out her phone. "Show her, Charles," she said softly. "Show her how much we love her. Show her how we are ready to forgive her." She tapped her screen and turned it toward me. It was a document file, a press release. "Read it," she commanded. I looked at the small screen. The headline read, "A Family's Heartbreak, the Struggle with Mental Illness and Addiction." I scanned the text. It was a letter written in the first person, a letter written by me. I, Aubrey Washington, am writing this to apologize to my family and my community. For years, I have struggled with a dependency on prescription painkillers and a severe gambling addiction. In my desperation, I abused my position at the foundation to fund my habits. My parents, in their infinite love, tried to shield me, but I betrayed their trust. I read the words, gambling addiction, painkillers, infinite love. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It was emotional, repentant, and completely fabricated. It had been written by a professional crisis management firm. I could tell by the cadence. It was too polished. "We have this ready to go," Linda said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "If the police come knocking, this goes to the press 5 minutes later. We will cry on camera. We will say we are getting you the help you need in a private facility, and by the time you get a court date, the world will already know you are just a junkie who stole from charity." She looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to break. She expected me to cry, to beg, to sign their papers just to stop them from destroying my reputation. Instead, a strange sound bubbled up in my throat. It started as a chuckle, dry and sharp, and then it bloomed into a full laugh. I laughed until I had to lean against the doorframe for support. I laughed because the absurdity of it was so perfect, so absolute. "Why are you laughing?" Charles demanded, stepping back as if my laughter were a physical weapon. "This is not funny, Aubrey. We will ruin you." I wiped a tear from the corner of my eye, a tear of mirth, not sadness. "You really do not get it, do you?" I said, shaking my head. "You are so obsessed with controlling the narrative that you documented the conspiracy." I pointed at Linda's phone. "That letter," I said. "That draft. Did you email it to yourself? Did you save it on the cloud?" Linda frowned. "What does that matter?" "It matters because the metadata on that file will show it was created 3 weeks ago," I explained, my voice sharp and precise. "It was created before I allegedly confessed. It was created before any investigation started. If I am a sudden drug addict, how did you know to write my apology letter a month in advance?" I stepped away from the door and walked back to the table. "You archived everything," I said, looking from Charles to Linda. "The emails with the ghostwriter, the texts discussing the insanity strategy, the payments to the psychiatrist on retainer. You saved it all because you are micromanagers. You wanted to make sure you got your money's worth." "We can delete it," Charles said quickly, reaching for his own phone. "We can wipe the servers right now." "No," I said. "You can't." I looked at my watch. It was 9:30. "Because at 9 o'clock this morning," I said, dropping the first bombshell, "I sat in a conference room at the Federal Building. I did not just speak to an agent. I signed a formal cooperation agreement with the United States Attorney's Office." The color that had returned to Charles's face drained away again, leaving him gray and ashen. "I am a protected federal witness, Father," I said, savoring the words. "I have full immunity in exchange for my testimony against the principles of the Washington Impact Initiative. That means me. That means you. That means Austin." "Immunity?" Linda whispered. You signed?" "I signed," I confirmed. "And part of that agreement involved handing over a complete mirror image of your digital lives. Mason Keller didn't just find the fraud. He found the backups. We have the draft of that letter. We have the emails where you told the lawyer to make her look crazy. We have it all. If you release that letter now, it is not a press release. It is Exhibit A in an obstruction of justice charge." Charles slumped into a chair. He looked suddenly old, the vitality of the powerful businessman evaporating instantly. But I wasn't done. "And there is one more thing," I said. "Mason found the transfer to the Cayman Islands." Charles's head snapped up. His eyes were wide with genuine terror. "The $400,000 you moved last Tuesday," I said, "to an account held by a shell corporation called Blue Horizon Ventures. You thought hiding it offshore would keep it safe if the audit went bad. You were getting ready to run, weren't you?" That is a diversified investment," Charles stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is flight capital," I corrected. "And because the prosecutor knows about it, they are not going to offer you bail. When the police come through those doors, you are not going home tonight. You are considered a flight risk. You are going to await trial in a cell." The room was silent. The air conditioning hummed, but it felt suffocatingly hot. They were trapped. Every exit they had built, the insanity plea, the fake apology, the offshore money, had been bricked up before they even tried to use it. My phone buzzed again. I looked down. A text from Austin. "You think you are holding the cards?" "I just called Detective Miller. He is on the payroll. Sis, he is coming to escort you out of the party for disturbing the peace. Let's see how confident you are in the back of a squad car." I read the text, feeling a flicker of the old fear. Detective Miller was a family friend. He had made Austin's DUI disappear years ago. But then, a second later, another text arrived, from Sonia Blake. Update. Detective Miller has been recused. The district attorney just formally removed him from any case involving the Washington family due to conflict of interest. The arrest team is state police and FBI. They are 2 minutes out. I looked up at my parents. They were watching me, waiting to see if Austin's threat had worked. They were clinging to one last shred of hope that their corruption was deep enough to save them. "Austin tried to call in his favor," I said quietly. "He called Detective Miller." Charles let out a breath, a small smile returning to his face. "Good. Miller will handle this. He understands loyalty." "Miller has been pulled off the rotation," I said, extinguishing that light. "The FBI is leading the arrest team. They are not interested in loyalty. Father, they are interested in conviction rates." Charles looked at Linda. Linda looked at Charles. And in that exchange, I saw the final breakage. There was no more plotting, no more scheming, just the raw, naked panic of two people who realized the ground had opened up beneath them. Charles's hands were shaking. He reached for a glass of water on the table, but his grip was so unsteady he knocked it over. The water spilled across the polished wood, soaking the edge of the velvet tablecloth. He didn't even notice. "You cannot do this," Linda whispered. Her voice was broken. "We are your parents." "No," I said. "You are my employers, and I am resigning." I picked up the clipboard I had used as a prop to get them into the room. I held it against my chest, feeling the solid reality of it. "You spent my entire life trying to shape me," I said. "You tried to mold me into a silent partner, a scapegoat, a nursemaid, a banker. You thought that if you changed the locks on my apartment, you could control my physical space. You thought if you wrote a letter in my name, you could control my story." I walked to the door again. This time, Charles did not move to stop me. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the weight of his own consequences. I opened the door. The flashing red and blue lights were visible through the high windows of the lobby now, casting a chaotic, strobe light rhythm across the elegant crowd outside. The music had stopped. The murmurs of confusion were starting to rise. I turned back to them one last time. "You wanted to change the locks to keep me in my place," I said. "But you forgot to check who held the master key. I have changed the locks on the story. Mother, and this time, you are on the outside." I stepped out into the hallway, leaving the door wide open, so there would be no barrier when the agents arrived to collect them. I stepped out of the VIP cloakroom and back into the main cavern of the ballroom. The transition was jarring, like walking out of a funeral and straight into a carnival. The air hit me, hot and scented with expensive perfume, roasted beef, and the metallic tang of hairspray. The jazz band was playing a spirited, up-tempo number, something brassy and loud that was designed to make people feel rich and invincible. To my left, a waiter laughed at a joke from a guest. To my right, the sound of crystal flutes clinking together rang out like tiny bells. It all sounded fake. It sounded like a soundtrack played over a scene of a house that was already burning down, but the occupants were too busy admiring their reflections in the windows to notice the smoke. I walked to the edge of the room, finding a spot near a heavy velvet curtain where the shadows were deepest. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy binder of evidence was gone. The weight of my parents' expectations was gone. The secret was gone. All that was left was the waiting. On the stage, the master of ceremonies was beaming, his teeth white under the harsh spotlights. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Please, let's have another round of applause for the couple of the hour. I would like to invite Charles and Linda Washington back to the center stage for the official commemorative photograph with our platinum sponsors." My parents walked back to the center of the stage. They had composed themselves with terrifying speed. My father, Charles, buttoned his tuxedo jacket, hiding the tremor in his hands. My mother, Linda, smoothed her dress and fixed a smile on her face that was as hard and bright as a diamond. They waved. They looked perfect. They looked like they owned the world. I watched them not as a daughter, but as an audience member who had already read the script and knew the twist ending was seconds away. My phone vibrated against my palm. It was a single, sharp pulse. I looked down. The message was from Sonia Blake. "We are at the front entrance. Secure the perimeter. You just need to stand still." I slipped the phone back into my purse. I did not look at the door. I looked at the crowd. And then I saw him. Austin came striding back into the ballroom through the side entrance. He looked a little disheveled. His tie was missing. His top button was undone, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that the ambient lighting could not hide. But he was smiling. He scanned the room, his eyes darting over the heads of the guests until they locked onto me. He stopped. He puffed out his chest. He gave me a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was a look that said, "I did it. I changed the locks. You are out. I win." He winked at me, a slow, arrogant wink. Then he tapped his pocket, signaling that he had the new key. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel fear or resentment toward my brother. I felt a profound, distant pity. He thought he had just locked me out of my apartment. He had no idea that by signing those papers for the locksmith, he had just locked himself into a conspiracy charge that carried a mandatory minimum sentence. I nodded back at him, a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Go ahead. Austin," I thought, "enjoy the key. It is the last thing you will ever own." Then, the sound changed. At first, it was just a low whine, barely audible over the saxophone solo. But then it grew. It rose in pitch and intensity, a wailing, discordant harmony that cut through the music like a knife. Sirens. Not one siren, many, a chorus of them, converging on the Crescent Lake Country Hall from all directions. The chatter in the room faltered. People stopped drinking. Heads turned toward the large glass windows at the front of the hall. Through the sheer drapes, blue and red lights began to stroke the walls, pulsing in a rhythmic, chaotic dance. The music stopped. The band leader, realizing something was wrong, cut the song off with a confused wave of his baton. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the sudden tension of 300 wealthy people wondering if they were in danger. "Is that a fire alarm?" someone whispered near me. "Maybe an accident on the main road," another voice suggested. On stage, Charles froze. His smile faltered. He looked at Linda, and I saw his lips move. "They are here." The double doors at the main entrance did not burst open. They were pushed open with slow, deliberate authority. The room gasped. 6 uniformed state troopers entered first. Forming a line, behind them walked 4 agents in the windbreakers of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and behind them walked a woman in a sharp gray suit, carrying a leather portfolio. It was the Assistant United States Attorney. The atmosphere in the room was vacuumed out instantly. The air became thin and cold. There was no more laughter, no more clinking glasses, just the heavy tread of boots on the polished marble floor. The officers did not stop at the door. They marched straight down the center aisle, parting the sea of evening gowns and tuxedos like a blue wave. Austin, who had been halfway to the stage to join his parents, froze in his tracks. He looked at the police, then at me. His face went slack. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving him looking like a frightened child. The lead FBI agent stopped at the base of the stage. He did not use a microphone, but his voice carried to every corner of the silent room. "Charles Washington, Linda Washington." My father stepped forward. He tried to summon the bluster of the powerful CEO. "Now see here," he stammered, his voice shaking. "This is a private event. You cannot just barge in here and—" "Mr. Washington, you are under arrest," the agent said, his voice flat and bored. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest, and for the arrest of your wife, Linda Washington." A collective gasp went through the room. Phone cameras began to rise, hundreds of tiny eyes recording the downfall. "On what grounds?" Linda shrieked. She grabbed Charles's arm, her composure shattering completely. "This is a mistake. Do you know who we are?" The agent pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "The warrant charges you with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement of charitable funds, money laundering, forgery of legal documents, and obstruction of justice," the agent read. He looked up, his eyes hard. "We also have a warrant for the seizure of all assets associated with the Washington Impact Initiative and the personal accounts of Austin Washington." Austin let out a sound that was half sob, half whimper. Two officers moved toward him. I saw him recoil, raising his hands, looking around for an escape that did not exist. "Cuff them," the agent ordered. The click of the handcuffs was loud in the silence. Metal on metal. It was a harsh, industrial sound that did not belong in a ballroom. Charles was turned around, his hands pulled behind his back, his head hung low, his shoulders slumped. The image of the titan of industry dissolved, revealing a small, greedy man in a rented suit. Linda resisted. She pulled away from the officer, her eyes wild, scanning the crowd. She wasn't looking for a lawyer. She was looking for a fixer. She was looking for the person she had trained for 30 years to handle her problems. She was looking for me. Her eyes swept the room, frantic and pleading, until they found me standing in the shadows by the curtain. Our eyes met across the ballroom. "Aubrey!" she screamed. It was a raw, desperate sound. "Aubrey, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Fix this." The crowd turned. Hundreds of faces looked at me. Mrs. Vanderhoven, the judge's wife, stared at me with her mouth open. I stood perfectly still. I did not step forward. I did not rush to the stage. I did not pull out my phone to call the family lawyer. I did not offer a comforting smile. I looked at my mother, the woman who had whispered about changing my locks, the woman who had drafted a press release calling me a drug addict, and I did absolutely nothing. I let her scream hang in the air, unanswered. I saw the realization hit her. Her eyes widened, and her face crumbled. She realized that the shock absorber was gone. She realized that for the first time in her life, she was going to have to hit the wall at full speed, with no one to cushion the blow. The officer took her arm firmly and led her away. She stopped screaming then. She just wept, a broken, ugly sound that echoed as they marched her out the front doors, past the donors she had lied to, past the friends she had tried to impress. Austin was led out behind them, his head down, sobbing into his chest. As he passed me, he didn't look up. He couldn't. The police followed. The doors swung shut. The room remained silent for 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, and then the explosion of noise began. The whispers, the shouts, the shock. It was a cacophony of scandal. I turned away from the stage. I did not walk toward the front exit where the police cars were flashing. I turned toward the small service door at the back of the room, the one used by the catering staff. I pushed the bar, and the door opened. I stepped out into the night. There were no flashing lights back here, no cameras, no screaming, just the quiet hum of the city and the pale yellow glow of a street lamp reflecting on a puddle. The air was cool and clean. It smelled of rain and wet asphalt, not perfume and lies. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they ached. I reached into my purse and pulled out the old key to my apartment, the one Austin had rendered useless. I looked at it for a moment, the jagged metal catching the light. Then, I tossed it into the nearest trash can. I didn't need it. I would get a new key tomorrow. But tonight, I didn't need a key to feel safe. My parents had spent their lives building a cage of gold and guilt, thinking they could lock me inside it forever. They thought the locks were on the doors. They never understood that the only lock that truly mattered was the one in my mind. And I had just picked it. I buttoned my coat, turned my collar up against the wind, and began to walk down the quiet street. I walked away from the chaos, away from the legacy, away from the name Washington. I was walking toward a small, silent apartment that might have a broken door, but for the first time in 34 years, the space inside it belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know where you are tuning in from and share your thoughts on Aubrey's decision. Please do not forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support means the world.